Hey, my name is Eli Sutter. I'm 38 years old, and I live alone at the end of Killdeer Road, 6 miles outside Sandstone, Minnesota, and last January I was 6 weeks from losing every acre of it to a debt I couldn't pay. It isn't much. 80 acres of hay ground and popple, a dozen milk cows, a woodlot that keeps the stove fed, and the white farmhouse my grandfather raised out of lumber he cut and planed himself. There's a porch across the front of it, and on the porch post hangs an old railroad lantern that my mother kept burning every night of her life. I kept lighting it after she was gone. Habit, I told myself. If you'd told me last winter that a fiddle was about to save this farm, and that the coldest night of January was already carrying the rest of my life toward my door, I'd have said the cold had gotten into your head. But that's how it happened. Every word of this is how it happened. People in town don't call me Eli much anymore. They call me the Sutter boy with the hand. The winter I was 19, I took a season's work at the sawmill over in Askov, and a saw took the last 2 fingers off my left hand before I understood what the new sound in the blade meant. The men there told me I was lucky. Maybe I was. But kids in the checkout line stare at a hand like mine, and grown women find a reason to study the shelf behind me. And after enough years of that, a man learns to buy his groceries at 7 in the morning and drive straight home. My father died when I was 30. His heart out by the manure spreader on a fine October morning. My mother went last spring, and she went slow. The kind of slow that empties a family's savings on its way out the door. I don't begrudge 1 cent of it. But when the funeral was paid for, what remained of everything was a note at the bank for $7,400, due in full on the last Friday of February. I had firewood orders, a milk check, and no honest arithmetic that reached that number. Nights, I sat at the kitchen table with a ledger and a pencil, and the figures just looked back at me. The cows didn't care. The stove didn't care. I milked, I split, I hauled. I lit my mother's lantern, and I went to bed in a house so quiet I could hear the frost crack in the nail heads. The knock came on a Thursday night in the middle of January. 9 o'clock, 18 below zero, snow coming down fine and steady. Rye heard it before I did. He's my cattle dog, old now, gray around the muzzle, deaf on his left side, and he came up off the rug with his ears forward like a 2-year-old. I hadn't heard a car, and on Killdeer Road you hear a car for a mile. I took the lantern off its nail and opened the door. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps with the snow falling around her, as if the night had set her down there and gone on without her. Young, middle 20s, maybe, a gray wool coat too thin for the season, town shoes soaked through, no hat, no gloves. Her hair had frost in it, not snow. Frost, white lace of it, her own breath frozen into her hair from walking. And she carried nothing at all except a black fiddle case with a rope tied on where the handle used to be, held against her chest with both arms, like a woman carrying the last thing she owns. "I saw your light," she said. Her voice was steady. Her chin wasn't. "You're about froze. Where's your car?" "There's no car." I walked from the Groningen corner. That was 6 miles in that cold. I looked past her for headlights, and there was nothing out there but snow and dark. "I've got no money," she said, and she lifted the case an inch as if I might have missed it. "But I can play. I can play for my supper, if you'll let me." "Supper's not for sale here," I said. "Come inside before the cold takes your ears." She came up the steps slow, watching me the whole while, and stopped just inside the door and stood on the mat like she meant to leave no mark of herself on the house. I stirred the fire up, put on side pork and potatoes, warmed the morning's biscuits under the skillet lid, and set all of it in front of her with coffee. She ate careful and slow, sitting straight, and it was plain that careful and slow was costing her everything, because she was hungry the whole way down. Her knuckles were split from the cold. When she wrapped both hands around the hot mug, she winced as the feeling came back into them. When her plate was clean, she stood, washed it before I could say a word, dried it, and set it in the rack. Then she took up the case and laid it on the table. "I keep my word," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "I keep my word," she said again, quieter. And this time I shut my mouth and let her stand on it. She opened the case. The lining was green felt gone bald at the corners, and pinned inside the lid was a little sprig of dried baby's breath. And in the middle of all that worn cloth lay a fiddle the color of dark honey, shining like it had been wiped down and cared for every day of its life. She held her hands over the stove a long minute first, working the fingers. Then she tucked the fiddle under her chin, right there in my kitchen, with the storm feeling for the window glass, and she played. I don't have the words a schooled man would have for it. It was a waltz, old-fashioned, and I knew it by the second bar, because my mother used to hum it at the sink, and I never once thought to ask her the name of it. Rye sat up and turned his good ear. The kettle ticked. She played with her eyes closed, and the sound filled the house the way heat does when you've come in half frozen, slow and everywhere at once. When she finished, she lowered the bow and opened her eyes and looked at me, and I found I had sat down at some point without knowing I did it. "That was worth more than side pork," I said. "Then I owe you change," she said, and the joke seemed to surprise her own mouth on its way out, as if joking were a language she hadn't spoken in a long while. "What's your name?" Marin, just the one name, set down carefully, like a coin she couldn't spare. I didn't reach for the rest of it. "Eli Sutter," I said. "There's a room in the back." It was my mother's. The bed's made up, and the door has a latch on it, and you can throw it if it suits you. I'll be gone in the morning. Storm says different. Nobody has to be gone anywhere. Before I went up myself, I did what I do every night of my life. I took the lantern out and hung it on the porch post and lit it, and the snow came sideways through the ring of light. When I turned, she was watching me from the hallway with the fiddle case held to her again. "Are you expecting somebody?" she asked. "No, my mother kept that light burning every night she lived in this house. She used to say it wasn't for the people inside, it's for whoever the dark is chasing." She looked at the lantern a long moment, and then she looked at me, and then she carried the case into the back room. I heard the latch slide home, small and almost apologetic, and I made sure my boots were loud going up the stairs so she would know exactly how far away I was. In the morning, the storm had blown itself out, and the whole world was blue and white and still. I came down at 5 for milking, and the path from the porch to the barn was already shoveled, clean to the gravel, and the kindling box stood full. She was at the stove with coffee made and oatmeal on. "I don't take charity," she said before I had a word out. "I know how to work." "Then we'll call it work," I said. That's how it started, not with any plan, with a shoveled path, and two people who had learned the same hard manners from different teachers, and neither one asking the other any questions. She stayed the next day because the county plow hadn't come. She stayed the day after because the milk truck slid the hill and needed chains and shoveling, and an extra pair of hands turned a half-day's mess into an hour's. By the end of that first week, neither of us was pretending to keep count of reasons. She knew cows, knew them the way you only know them if you were raised in a barn. She leaned her forehead into a flank while she stripped a quarter, talked low to the nervous heifer, never once got kicked. My grandfather milked 40 head, was all she said about it. She could run the wood splitter after one showing, and she stacked tighter rows than I do. She mended the torn cuff of my barn coat with waxed thread, little even stitches you'd need a lens to count. Tuesdays and Fridays she baked bread, and the house started smelling the same as it did when my mother was well, and I'd stand in the doorway a second longer than I needed to before going out. Every night after supper, she played. Just one tune, no more, like it was rationed. Rent, she called it. Some nights it was a reel that had Rye grumbling at the joy of it, some nights a hymn, and some nights the waltz, and on those nights we didn't talk after. But she never came to town. Saturday feed runs, she'd hand me a list in a small straight hand and find something to do on the far side of the barn until my truck was gone. When any truck slowed out on Killdeer Road, her hands stopped whatever they were doing until the sound moved on. She kept the fiddle case under her bed. I noticed all of it, and I asked about none of it. A man who has been stared at learns not to stare. Sundays I read, because that's what winter Sundays are for. One gray afternoon she asked what the book was, and it was my mother's, the Psalms, the cover soft as glove leather from her hands. Marin asked me to read one out. I'm no reader aloud, but I read the one my mother marked with a ribbon, about going through the valley and fearing no evil, and when I looked up, Marin was staring into the stove with her jaw set hard against something. And she said, "Again, if you don't mind." And I read it again, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough of one. One afternoon she found the bank's envelope on the table where I'd been careless with it. She read the front of it and set it down like it had heat in it. "February," I said. "February is my problem, not yours. Problems don't keep a calendar that neat," she said. But she let it be. Late in that month, the wind came up one night and shook the house, and we sat close to the stove, and the talk went where winter talk goes. I told her about my mother, the good years first, the garden and the church choir and the lantern, then the 2 bad years, the drives to Duluth, the chair by the bed, the statements getting redder while the woman got smaller. I told it plain. She listened the whole way through without once saying the soft, useless things people say. Then she was quiet a while, tuning the fiddle slower than it needed. "My father built this," she said, "the year I was born." "Built it?" "He made instruments. Fiddles, mostly 2 mandolins. A cello once, for a church down in the cities. And he was the best dance fiddler in Pine County. That's not a daughter bragging. That's what people said." I set my coffee down. "Otto Voss," I said. Her bow stopped dead on the string. "You knew him," she said. "I heard him. Grange Hall in Sandstone when I was a boy. He'd play till the floorboards moved under your boots. My folks danced to your father. Half this county danced to your father." Her eyes filled up, and she looked down at the fiddle until she had them ordered again. "He died 6 winters ago," she said. "December, and everything he had is gone now." Mostly, she touched the dried flowers pinned in the lid of the case. "Mostly," she said again, and I let it lie where she said it. Another evening she took my left hand, the ruined one, before I could think to pull it back the way I do. She turned it over in the lamplight and studied it, and she didn't flinch, and she didn't make her face kind on purpose, which is worse. "Does the cold get into it?" "Some nights." My father's hands were scars from wrist to fingertip. Plane, chisel, strings. I grew up thinking that's what a man's hands were supposed to look like, hands that had done something. She set my hand back down on the table, gentle, like she was returning a borrowed tool, and went back to her mending. I sat there a while with that hand lying in the light where anybody could see it, and I didn't put it in my pocket, and that was new. There was laughing in that house, too, I want that said. The morning the cream separator got away from her and painted us both, she laughed so hard she had to sit down on the milk-room step, and I stood there dripping and grinning like the fool of the county, and Rye barked at the pair of us like we'd lost our minds. It had been quiet on that farm for a long time. It wasn't quiet anymore. Then, on the first Monday of February, a black crew cab pickup eased up my driveway with gold lettering on the doors. Crayland and Timber. Marin was at the east window with a bread pan in her hands. The color went out of her face like water out of a cracked pail. She set the pan down without a sound, stepped into the pantry, and pulled the door to within an inch of shut. Not a word. I went out and shut the house door behind me and stood at the top of the steps, and the man who got out of that truck took his time coming, looking over my barn, my wood pile, my fence lines, with the eyes of a man doing arithmetic. He was big, gone silver at the temples, 50-odd, in a black wool coat that had never been near a barn, and boots with a shine on them. "Mr. Sutter," he said. "Alden Cray. I know who you are. Then I'll skip the handshake, seeing as you're not offering one." He smiled with the bottom half of his face. "I'll be quick. Your bank down in Hinckley sells off its tired paper every December, and I make a habit of buying it. I own a drawer full of this county's bad winters, Mr. Sutter, and your note is in it. $7,400, due the last Friday of this month. In full. You drove 6 miles of bad road to tell me a date I already know. I drove 6 miles to be neighborly. He set one shine boot on my bottom step. A note like yours can get lost in a drawer for years if the right man wants it lost. And it happens I'm missing something, and finding it would make me a grateful man. A young lady. My fiancée. She wandered off 10 days before our wedding, middle of January, no coat to speak of, not a dollar on her. She's not a well girl, you understand. Wanders, takes things that don't belong to her. Her poor aunt down in Brainerd is sick over it. He looked at me, mild as milk. A man who helped bring her home safe, I'd count a friend. My friends don't hear much out of that drawer. It's a long county, I said. Lots of roads. There are, he said. He took his boot off my step, straightened his coat, and got most of the way to the truck before he stopped, as if he'd just remembered a small thing. Funny about snow. Sound carries over it. Folks in town tell me there's fiddle music out this way of an evening. Pretty playing, they say. Real pretty. He touched his hat brim. You have a good winter, Mr. Sutter. He backed down my driveway slow, like a man leaving something he already owned. I found her sitting on the pantry floor in the dark, with her knees drawn up and both hands pressed over her mouth. I crouched down to her level and stayed there until she could look at me. Tell it all the way through, I said. Then we'll have coffee. Then we'll decide what we do about it. We, you hear me? She told it at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug she never drank from. Her mother died when she was small, and her father raised her between the workbench and the dance floor. He had a piece of land east of town, along the Kettle River, 40 acres of white pine that his own grandfather had left standing when everything around it went for lumber. Tall trees, old ones, worth real money and worth more than money. 9 years back, Alden Cray came wanting to buy it, and her father wouldn't sell. Cray kept coming. What her father signed in the end was a lease. 10 years, standing timber, select cut only, payments every October. She remembered the supper table the night he signed it, how he said a lease keeps the land in the family and the wolf off the porch. Cray paid 3 Octobers and then stopped paying, and by then her father was sick. And then he was dying, and it was December, and she was 20 years old, and she buried him the week before Christmas. In the spring, a deed showed up recorded at the courthouse. It said Otto Voss had sold those 40 acres to Alden Cray for $10,000, signed the 12th of December. 6 days before he died, when he couldn't hold a spoon, let alone pull a pen through his own name. A lawyer in Hinckley told her that fighting a recorded deed takes money, and she had a fiddle and a bus ticket. She went to her aunt in Brainerd. Cray's cruise went into the pines. 5 winters, she said, and looked at the window. You could hear the saws from the road, people told her. She never once drove past to look. And the wedding, I said, quiet. He came to Brainerd in the fall, courteous as Sunday. He paid the back taxes on my aunt's house like it was nothing, and he sat in her front room in his good coat and asked me to marry him. She looked at her hands. My aunt said he'd changed. Said a woman alone doesn't get many trains. And I was tired, Eli. Tired of owing everybody for every floor I slept on. So I said yes. And, God forgive me, I meant to go through with it. The last Saturday of January. I had the dress. What happened? 10 days before, I came early to the timber yard office. The door was open an inch, and he was on the phone, laughing. Her voice went flat and careful, giving it back word for word. He said, relax. Once she signs, any claim floating around out there dies inside the family. A wife doesn't sue her own husband's deed. The stove popped. Neither of us jumped. I walked out the same way I came in, she said. That night I left the dress hanging on the closet door, and I took the only thing that was mine, and I got the early bus. I meant to come here, to Sandstone, to Papa's ground. I don't know what I thought I'd do when I saw it. Then the storm shut the road, and a mail carrier let me off at the Groningen corner, and there was one light burning anywhere in the world, and it was yours. I sat with that a minute. There are things a man wants to say that are no use said. Why the fiddle? I asked instead, of everything you might have grabbed. Because at the end, when the morphine had him, he held my wrist and said the same thing over and over. If a Cray ever tells you the pines are his, let the fiddle speak. She shook her head slowly. My father never talked in riddles in his whole life, except at the end of it. I thought it was the fog talking. I kept the fiddle because it was him. Every piece of him I have left fits in that case. I was already up and reaching for the flashlight on the porch shelf. Get it, I said. Humor me. We laid the fiddle under the lamp, and I shined the light in through the sound hole, angling it, and there, against the inside of the back, flat under the little paper label that read Otto Voss, Sandstone, was the edge of something that was not wood and was not lining. Oilcloth, glued down flat and square, neat as a patch on a work shirt. Marin didn't breathe. That's not lining, I said. That's a package. She put her hand over the sound hole, soft, like feeling for a pulse. Let the fiddle speak, she said. We didn't pry at it ourselves. A fiddle is held together with glue that lets go for heat and patience and nothing else, and neither of us had the hands or the right to ruin Otto Voss's work. But I knew who did. Arvid Salo, up in Duluth, 81 years old. A luthier with a workshop behind his house on the hill above the harbor. Everybody who ever fiddled between Hinckley and the North Shore knew Arvid. And Arvid, it turned out, had known Otto Voss for 30 years. Friday morning we milked early and drove up through the cold sunshine with the case riding between us on the bench seat. Salo took one look inside it and stopped moving. I remember this one, he said. He would never sell it. Said it was spoken for. He looked at Marin over his spectacles. You'd be what it was spoken for. When we told him what we were after and showed him the edge of the oilcloth through the sound hole, the old man got very still. He came in here that last October, he said. Sick as he was, he drove himself up. Bought hide glue off me and a yard of oilcloth and wouldn't say one word about what for. Said only, insurance, Arvid, the kind that holds its tune. He warmed the seam and worked a thin blade around it, with no hurry in him anywhere, humming the whole time, and it took the better part of 2 hours. And when the top came free, he lifted out a flat oilcloth packet and set it in Marin's hands, because it was hers. 3 papers, folded small. The first was the lease. Typed, dated 9 years back, signed at the bottom by Otto Voss and Alden Cray. Lease of standing timber, 10 years, select cut only, payment every October, and along the margin in her father's careful hand, bluff stand excluded, not for cutting. The second was a page out of his ledger. 3 payments recorded, 3 Octobers, and after that nothing but neat entries that read, October, no payment. Wrote to Cray. No answer. The third was a sworn statement in her father's own writing, notarized in Hinckley 5 weeks before he died. I have sold no land to Alden Cray or to any man, it said. He has asked 3 times, and 3 times I have refused him. If any paper ever says otherwise, that paper lies. It was signed, and it was stamped, and Marin read it standing up and then had to sit down. Salo kept the fiddle overnight to close it up proper, and he wouldn't take $1 for any of it. You'll bring it back when it needs anything, he said to Marin, and you'll play at my funeral, but don't hurry about it. The papers rode home in the truck between us, wrapped in the oilcloth her father had bought for them. Aggie Pell farms the next place up Killdeer Road, alone since her Walt died, and for 30 years before she retired to her chickens she worked at the Abstract and Title Office in Pine City. Monday she drove down there and came home with a certified copy of Alden Cray's deed, and she laid it beside Otto's papers on my kitchen table and read them against each other for an hour, and then she took her reading glasses off. Here's your nail, she said, dry as kindling. This deed says Otto signed on the 12th of December, and it's notarized by Vernon Deal. So I sat 2 pews behind Vernon Deal's casket the last week of that same October. Lutheran Church in Hinckley. His widow served ham after. She tapped the stamp with 1 finger. A dead man notarized Alden Cray's deed. There is no lawyer in Minnesota so fancy he can talk his way around a funeral. Her Walt's old firm in Pine City had a young lawyer in it now, Nils Hedlund, with ears that went red when he got worked up and a handshake he meant. He was worked up a quarter of the way through the papers. Inside the week he filed a petition to have the deed declared void and the title quieted in the estate of Otto Voss, with a full accounting of every stick of timber taken off that parcel since. The papers went into his office safe that same Friday, and I slept better for knowing it. Judge Merritt Halvorsen set the hearing for the last Tuesday of February, 3 days before my note came due. Cray's lawyer asked for a delay. The judge said no. Cray's version of things was all over the county by then, and it came to me by way of the milk hauler, who at least had the decency to look ashamed while he passed it along, standing right there in the barn alley where Marin could hear every word. A runaway bride, the story went, not right in the head, stole a valuable instrument out of her own father's estate, and the Sutter boy with the hand was keeping her out on Killdeer Road, and wasn't that a picture? I watched Marin go still over the milk cans, and then I watched her decide something. Saturday, she said. I'm coming on the feed run. I'm done being a roomer. Gordy Mackey's feed store on a Saturday morning holds half the township, and that Saturday it held Alden Cray too, at the counter with two of his yardmen holding court. He saw us and the store went quiet, aisle by aisle. "Well," he said, "there she is. Sweetheart, you had this whole county worried." Then he turned to the men beside him, mild and sorrowful. "It's a hard thing to say in public. The girl's not well. Her family tried everything money could try. And now she's out on a back road keeping house with—" He didn't finish it. He just looked at my hand and let everybody watch him look. Marin set our list on the counter in front of Gordy Mackey like it was any other Saturday. Then she turned around, calm, loud enough, and no louder. "You buried my father's lease," she said, "and you recorded a sale he never signed. You had it notarized by a man who was 2 months in his grave, and you got engaged to me so the last person with a right to say so in court would be your wife and say nothing." Tuesday morning, Judge Halverson reads every page of it into the record. Come and listen. You've always liked the front of a room. Nobody moved. The coffee maker behind the counter gurgled once, and Gordy Mackey found something to count on the far shelf. Cray crossed the floor and stood close, and the low voice he used was for the two of us only. "Friday still comes. Sutter, whatever the fiddle says." Then he pushed out the door with his men behind him, and it was a while before that store went back to talking. 2 nights before the hearing, Rye came up off the rug at 2 a.m. with a roar I hadn't heard out of him in years, and by the time I got downstairs with the flashlight, there was nothing in the yard but cold. Morning showed us the kitchen window screen bent out of its frame and boot prints in the snow under it. Smooth-soled town boots, the kind no farmer wears in February. They'd gotten nothing. The papers were in a lawyer's safe in Pine City, and the fiddle slept upstairs now and had since Duluth. But after that night, the case quit sleeping under her bed altogether. It sat at the supper table between us on its own chair, like company we'd stopped apologizing for. The next night I found her out on the porch in my mother's wool coat, under the lit lantern, looking down the black line of the road. "I keep bringing trouble up your steps," she said. "Trouble was already on the road," I said. "You just beat it here." She smiled at that, but it didn't hold. "When this is over," she said, "however it comes out, I won't hang on you like a debt. There are lessons I could teach in Duluth." "There's stay past the thaw," I said. "It came out rough, with no dressing on it, because I'd been carrying it a month and it left on its own." She turned and looked up at me. "And past the thaw? Stay till the fiddle wears out. He built it to outlast us both." I know what I said. She looked at me a long time, with the lantern light moving on her face. Then she put one cold hand against my jaw, and she kissed me, once, soft, and went inside. And I stood out there in the cold, grinning at a lantern like it was the harvest moon. The courtroom in Pine City is small and the radiators knock, and that Tuesday the benches were full. Aggie in the front row in her church coat, Arvid Salo, who had driven down from Duluth with the fiddle closed up and singing again in case the court needed to see it. Half the Saturday crowd from the feed store. The milk hauler. People I'd have sworn didn't know my first name. Nils Hedlund's ears were red as stove iron, but his hands were steady, and he laid it out plain as a fence line. The lease, with her father's margin note about the bluff stand. The ledger page, 3 payments, and then the long silence. The sworn statement, and he read that one out loud, word by word. "I have sold no land to Alden Cray or to any man. If any paper ever says otherwise, that paper lies." Then the certified copy of Cray's deed, and beside it the county's own record of the death of Vernon Deal. Notary public, buried the last week of October. The state of Minnesota buried its notary in October, Your Honor, Headland said. This deed swears he was stamping documents in December. Cray's lawyer was a smooth man down from the cities who talked with his hands open like he was giving you something. He called it theater. We are asked to believe, Your Honor, that a dying man did his estate planning through a musical instrument. The better question is who put those papers in there, and when. But Salo had already sworn to the hide glue, and the oilcloth bought off his own shelf that last October. An old man with his hat in his hands, and there was nothing smooth to be done about him. Then a man stood up in the third row, and half the room knew him. Bud Lindfist had bossed Cray's Woods Cruise for 11 years, and he had walked into Headland's office the evening before and asked to say his piece under oath. He said it now, with his cap in both hands, and he never looked at Cray once. I ran the crew that cut the river parcel. 5 winters. I asked twice about the boundary paper, on account of the bluff stand wasn't marked, and I don't cut unmarked pine. Mr. Cray told me, cut fast. Once she marries me, the question's settled for good. His jaw worked once. I've got a daughter about her age. That's all I came to say. You could hear the radiators. Cray leaned to his lawyer and whispered something, and the lawyer didn't whisper anything back. Judge Halvorsen took her glasses off and folded them, and when she spoke it was quiet enough that the whole room leaned into it. The deed is void. It was void the day it was recorded, and I find that the man who recorded it knew it. Title is quieted in the estate of Otto Voss, sole heir Marin Voss. The defendant will account for every board foot removed from that parcel, at market rates with interest. And the clerk will walk this file across the hall to the county attorney this afternoon. She looked at Cray for one moment over the top of her folded glasses, the look a schoolteacher saves for the boy who finally got caught. We're adjourned. Alden Cray walked out of that courtroom past benches full of people who had known his name their whole lives, and not one of them nodded to him, and not one of them looked away either. I believe that walk was the most expensive thing he ever bought. On the courthouse steps, Gordy Maki came up, buttoning his coat like it needed all his attention, and then he quit stalling. I passed along what I'd heard instead of what I knew, he said to Marin. I was wrong about you, miss. And I'll say this one as loud as I said the other. Come to the Grange in June, Mr. Maki, she said. Bring your wife. Cray settled inside of 2 weeks. With the county attorney reading along over his shoulder, he had no appetite for an open accounting. $41,000 to the estate of Otto Voss for 5 winters of white pine, and before $1 of it was discussed. Marin had Headland write my note into the terms. Surrendered, canceled, stamped, paid in red ink. I argued about it exactly once. She put one finger down on the table and said, call it rent. For a winter of suppers. I let it be. As for Cray, by the time the ice went out, men from the state were carrying boxes out of the timber yard office. And he didn't stay to watch. He sold the yard, the trucks, and the big house on Sturgeon Lake, paid what the law made him pay, and moved across the line into Wisconsin, where nobody's father had made him rich and nobody's daughter knew to cross the street when he smiled. Her aunt wrote from Brainerd. 3 pages, most of them apology. Marin read it twice at the kitchen table, and then she wrote back, and what she wrote was an invitation. In April we walked her father's parcel together, the first time she had set foot on it in 6 years. I won't pretty it up. From the road in, it was stumps, some of them wide as wagon wheels, and slash going gray under the snowmelt, and she walked through all of it with her chin level and paid it the respect of looking at every acre. But the crews had cut from the road in for the easy hauling, and they never reached the bluff. Up over the river her father's white pines still stood, 80 and 90 feet of them older than the county, the wind moving through them way up high with that sound like water that never arrives anywhere. She had carried the fiddle up. Of course she had. She stood under her father's saved pines and played the waltz, the one my mother used to hum at the sink, and I won't try to tell you what that was like. Some music you don't describe. Some music you just stand in. In May, the Soil and Water District sold us 2,000 white pine seedlings, and we spent 3 days planting the cut ground. The two of us bent over planting bars until our backs gave out. On the second morning, Bud Lindqvist showed up with his own planting bar and no explanation, and we didn't ask him for one. He planted his share, and better. We were married in June, on the farm, under the yard oak, and Pastor Lindgren from the Lutheran church in town read the vows. Aggie Pell stood up with Marin. Gordy Maki came with his wife, and a gift too big for the table. Her aunt came down from Brainerd and cried from the first word to the last, and Marin held her hand through most of it anyway. And at the Grange Hall after, on the same floor her father used to play till it moved, Arvid Salo, 81 years old, took up Otto Voss's fiddle and played half the night so that my wife could dance. She danced with everybody. She danced with me most. The note hangs by the kitchen door now, in a dime store frame, stamped paid in red. Some men frame diplomas. Come fall, we opened her father's workshop shed out on the parcel, 6 years shut, and what we found carved into the underside of his workbench is a story all its own. I'll tell it some winter's night, when the lantern's lit and the stove is talking. Because my mother was right about that lantern, and that's the end of it and the whole of it. You don't light it for the people already inside. You light it for whoever the dark is chasing, and you light it every night, not because you know who's coming, but because you don't. One night the dark chased everything I now love up those porch steps, carrying a fiddle case with a rope handle, offering to play for her supper. It's snowing again tonight, soft, no wind in it. The lantern's lit. Rye has the rug. And from the kitchen, over the low talk of the stove, there's a fiddle playing an old waltz, unhurried, for nobody's supper at all. Just for us. Just for home.